continue our meeting. We now come to the first item on the agenda this morning, and it is an exchange of views with Minister Pekka Haavisto following his trip to Ethiopia and Sudan as Special European Envoy. This is a joint exchange of views with the Committee on Development, so I'd also like to welcome colleagues from DEVE, especially Chairman Thomas Tobe. Minister Haavisto, dear Pekka, it is a real pleasure to welcome you to our joint committee meeting. Thank you so much for taking your time to join us and to share the insights from your missions to Ethiopia and to Sudan. The Committee on Development and the Committee on Foreign Affairs are following the situation in the region very. We are, of course, particularly concerned about the situation in Tigray. We have held a series of exchange of views since the beginning of the conflict between the Ethiopian government and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, amongst others, as well as with the ambassador of Ethiopia to the EU, to whom we have conveyed our concerns. This conflict has caused untold death, destruction to civilian infrastructure, and has now forced 2 million people to flee the region. During your mission, dear Pekka, you emphasized the EU's priorities for the region, the withdrawal of Eritrean troops, civilian access to humanitarian aid, dialogue between Tigray and Addis, and the laying down of arms. Sadly, this seems a distant prospect even after 8 months of conflict. Minister Haavisto, we are eager to hear your impression of events on the ground and your assessment of the situation. But before I give you the floor, let me invite my colleague Thomas Tobe, Chair of the Committee on Development, to present his introductory remarks. Thomas. Thomas Tobe is obviously not connected, or we have technical difficulties. Well, then I can immediately hand over to Pekka Haavisto. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David, and good to see you again. And thank you for this nice and kind invitation from your side to talk with your committee on the recent developments in Tigray and the whole of Ethiopia. And I was first mandated in early 21 by Excellency High Representative Borrell to travel first to Ethiopia as a fact-finding mission. That time I did not visit Tigray, but had an opportunity to visit Sudan and also the Rakuba camp on the border of Ethiopia and Sudan. And of course, in the camp of Rakuba already see the misery of people who have been fleeing from Tigray. And it was particularly clear that in the Rakuba camp already in February, there were more than 20,000 refugees, and the refugee workers said that people who are fleeing from Tigray are even in a worse condition than earlier. There are unoccupied children coming. There are people who have been suffering malnutrition and so forth. And this was the situation in February. I had then opportunity to meet Prime Minister Abiy. I had opportunity to talk to Foreign Minister Mekonnen and other ministers in Addis Ababa, and it was very clear actually that in February there was still this kind of atmosphere of denial ongoing in Ethiopia. They even denied, of course, they denied the human rights violations, they denied the refugee crisis, and they denied the Eritrea participation, which was, of course, a little bit shocking for us because we had already several witnesses and the humanitarian organization on the ground who have been witnessing the Eritrean presence. actually, from my first trip in February, there were 3 key messages by European Union to deliver to Ethiopian government. First was unhindered humanitarian access. Second was the independent human rights investigation. And third was the immediate withdrawal of Eritrean troops. This was the position of us already in February. And on unhindered humanitarian access, some progress has happened, some more easy visa rules for humanitarian workers, some access has been facilitated, but definitely it's not unhindered situation yet. The second independent human rights investigation, Ethiopia government allowed their own national human rights organization and Madame Bachelet, the UN human rights organization, to start to work together to make an assessment. The results has not yet been published, but of course we wait those results any day. And on immediate withdrawal of Eritrean troops, absolutely no progress. Then my second trip to the region was in April. I actually visited also the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia, Arab Emirates, and then again Ethiopia. And it was clear that in April, they in Ethiopia had to face the situation like it is. We talked about the things with their own names, the presence of Eritreans and so forth. And we, of course, in addition to those key messages that we had in February, had an immediate ceasefire request and also immediate starting of the talks with the Tigray opposition, starting a national dialogue. And of course, in addition to that, we raised issues on the GERD, the Renaissance Dam issue, and the Al-Fasaka Triangle issue, which seems still to be a hotspot of the area. None of these issues, not the national dialogue or ceasefire, has been so far implemented by the Ethiopian government. And as you know, they are now in the middle of so-called election process. They have postponed the elections, and in the end of June should be the first round, and I understand that then in autumn the next ones. In addition to these key messages, I had the opportunity then to visit again with the mandate of Josep Borrell, Tigray, Mekele. We saw the hospital there. We heard the stories about all the closed hospitals and destroyed hospitals and health stations. We had an opportunity to meet the humanitarian organization and hear the eyewitnesses. We met with the women who have been victims of sexual violence and harassment. Very, very serious crimes. So it's very obvious that when these human rights reports are coming, it will be a very dark picture on Tigray. What is the situation now, particularly from the western Tigray? People have fled. As said, an estimation between 1 or 2 million IDPs, many of them now in Mekele. We met them in schools that they are occupying now as temporary IDP centers. At the same time, of course, the authorities said they have no place for these people, no possibility to have them permanently there. There are no permanent refugee camps. And at the same time, the government of Ethiopia is talking about returning of these people to Western Tigray, but not any credible plan of doing that. And of course, if you send farmers back to locations where their equipment and houses are destroyed, it's another catastrophe. What we are facing now is very likely the even increased humanitarian catastrophe in the form of malnutrition. UN OCHA has been warning about that. People have not been able to cultivate during the agricultural season and so forth. So we have additional problems coming for Tigrayans. Maybe then finally, David, if I say a word about Eritrea, you might know that I have been throughout the years keeping quite regular contacts to Eritrea, trying to find a way how to get Eritrea out of this current isolation where they are. And I have been maintained almost weekly contact to Asmara, to President Isaias Afewerki's advisors to understand the Eritrean dynamics. And in the beginning, of course, they were binding their fate very much to fate of Prime Minister Abiy and the success of Abiy's project in Ethiopia. Now, of course, it is obvious that they start to look the situation also from their national security perspective, in the case that some changes are happening on the political line or leadership in Ethiopia in the future. And I think this should be the time when we could fix the border between Ethiopia and Eritrea according to the Algiers agreement. And I think it's a very important message also to Eritrea that in the future their national security would be guaranteed. But at the same time, of course, they have to be responsible for all the atrocities that has happened in Tigray, and we have to increase our political pressure to Eritrea to force them to withdraw from Tigray, because no negotiations between the Tigrayans and the government of Ethiopia will happen until Eritrean troops have left the country. So this is more or less my short introduction, and I'm happy to hear your comments and answer possible questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Foreign Minister Haavisto, for your introduction. We will now open up the floor, and I will start by giving the floor to our chair of the standing delegation, Carlos Sorinho, S&D. Okay, Mr. Sorinho is not connected. Then we might come back to him. I will then give the floor to our AFET standing rapporteur, Fabio Castaldo. Not connected. Then we go back and we go to, then I give the floor to Paolo Rangel, AFET EPP.
Thank you, Chair, or both chairs. First, I also naturally would like to thank on behalf of EPP, Foreign Minister of Finland, for his work, for his commitment that was quite clear in this intervention to overcome this very challenging situation and to work for peace, for stability, reconciliation. Our group, EPP, fully supports your mandate, and we wish you full success. The situation in Tigray remains very serious, very concerning. This major humanitarian tragedy needs to be addressed by the European Union and by the international community as a whole. We must prevent famine and further atrocities, such as the G7 did this past weekend. We call for an immediate cessation of hostilities, unimpeded humanitarian access to all areas, and the immediate withdrawal of Eritrean forces. We naturally also welcome the work of the Office of the United Nations of Human Rights. It is clear that this conflict can only be solved politically, and naturally the solution has to be based on reconciliation and in social dialogue. Obviously, the conflict is built on a fragile social and economic ground in both Ethiopia and also Sudan, which has just recently overcome decades of this devastating and brutal regime of Omar al-Bashir. The situation is further complicated by the disputes over water access and the very well documented disagreement over the dam in Ethiopia. As such, we must make sure that this situation does not have a further negative impact on the wider region as a whole, which is already troubled by too many conflicts and challenges. I would say that in this complicated environment, dear Foreign Minister, it is very good to have you in this position. We reiterate our call for a credible political process and our full support to your mission and your efforts. And of course, we reiterate the conclusion by the G7 this weekend. The joint call upons Ethiopia's leaders to advance a broader, inclusive political process to foster a national reconciliation and a consensus towards a future based on respect for the human and political rights of all people in Ethiopia. So I wish you also all the luck, because we are very, very aware that this is a very sensitive, difficult and delicate task, but you know that you have our trust.
Thank you. And then give the floor to our chair of the standing delegation, Carlos Sorinho, S&D, please.
Thank you very much, President. Sorry for the delay, some confusion perhaps in the calendar. Thank you also to Mr. Avisto for coming to Parliament to inform us of your mission and for your presentation and the insights. We support, of course, the key demands of the European Union, most importantly to cease hostilities, to provide access for humanitarian access, and to put an end to the horrible human rights abuse and to investigate those that have been committed. The situation in Ethiopia is extremely worrying, and taking into account what it is at stake, it simply cannot get enough attention. Even without the Tigray conflict, it is clear that the Ethiopian transition is very fragile. In addition, with the current conflict in Tigray and the mounting tensions among the different groups in Ethiopia, there are real risks of the long-term unity of Ethiopia and as a multi-ethnic country. Ethiopia is going into elections in June, with important parts of the opposition boycotting it, and in some areas the security situation being bad or volatile even outside Tigray. So, in addition, COVID-19 is not under control, and the rate of infections is currently higher than it was when the elections were initially postponed last year. So there are tensions with Sudan and Egypt. The Ethiopian Prime Minister would like to forge a closer alliance with Eritrea and Somalia, two countries that are themselves facing a new uncertain future in terms of their governance. While the government had said that the military operations were only targeting the TPLF and not Tigrayans, there are not many Tigrayans left in any public service job, so it seems the past grievances are giving way to revenge and new grievances. So, Minister, after your visit in February, you said that many officeholders in Addis Ababa seem to be in a state of denial and as to the gravity of the situations. So I wonder then else can be done so that the Prime Minister and those around him recognize the immense risks they are running and how they can make to understand that they need to make a transition inclusive, which also means coming to terms with those who held the power in the past in ways other than obliterating them. Otherwise, things can still get worse. Finally, if time permits, I would like to ask of the External Action Service, let's speak a bit more about the role of other actors in the region and what their perception and engagement is or may be. At last but not least, how we coordinate with the United States, which, under the new administration, has recognized the urgency and importance of what is happening and will appoint a special envoy to the Horn of Africa. Thank you, Mr. President, for the opportunity to speak now.
Thank you. Maria Arena, AFET, S&D.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Well, we'll have the opportunity to discuss Ethiopia this morning and also this afternoon in the strategic AFET dialogue on the role of Europe, and it's important for us to have the information on the situation in Ethiopia today. Of course, there are two things which are very important: the situation in Tigray and humanitarian situation for the Ethiopian populations who are being deprived of a lot of rights. That is the right to food and health, as well as the right to freedom of expression. But I wanted to put a question about the other communities. We know that Ethiopia is made up of two main communities, accounting for 32%, or the almost Namaha. We know about the fact that Tigray accounts for 4%. But how is this fifth federal system, which should represent all the people of Ethiopia, is going to guarantee? How is it going to guarantee rights for every Ethiopian? Because as there's violence in Tigray, we've got to be very mindful as to what's going to happen to the other communities in Ethiopia, and guarantee freedom of expression and freedom of getting organized and being representative in the political array of Ethiopia. The secondly, outside partners, especially with respect to reprisals that take place in Tigray, with the support of Eritrea and their dictatorship. But there's also the Bahaj, where there's a conflict between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia on how water should be distributed. Now, that's something that could make things very difficult in that region. So how can we actually analyze this situation in a much calmer way? How can we renegotiate the water distribution contract in the Nile? Should we be based on the past, which guaranteed 80% of the Nile waters to Egypt, or could we actually discuss the filling of the dam, which would not endanger the populations of other countries? And could we have a more scientific way of using waters, which might help us as Europeans to play the role of mediators in this water conflict, which really could be dramatic? Thank you.
Thank you. Javier Nott, AFET Renew.
Gracias.
Thank you.
El conflicto.
Well, the Tigray conflict has been brought on by the loss of Tigray's power in the government by the Oromaras and Humuno, who's been supported by the Amaras. That's the whole reality. It's not an artificial conflict. It's a political rival type conflict. And Tigray has always been kind of the apple of discord between Eritrea and Maras. There are several questions. How can we reconstruct, not only materially but morally, Tigray, so that they can actually feel that they are part of a complicated community like Ethiopia? Then, what impact will the withdrawal of Eritrean and Ethiopian forces from the Somali conflict, which has a certain component, but it's the presence of a Christian army, which is an imperial army on in certain ethnical areas like Somalian, and therefore it's kind of a continuation of the Somalian regime. And what impact will it have on Egypt in addition to Sudan? We've got the Nile and the Blue Nile. This is an important component which will be affected by the Renaissance brought on by the 1959 agreements on the water distribution in Egypt. And I wonder what impact this is all going to have on all these structural areas. There are these realities based on rivalry. What do you think of all of this and how it will impact on the situation?
Floor to our AFET Standing Rapporteur, Fabio Castaldo.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to Mr. Haavisto for being here today with us for exchanging views and takeaways from his visit to Ethiopia and Sudan. The suffering created by the breakout of the hostilities in Tigray and the subsequent flows of refugees in Sudan have been discussed several times in this committee, as well as the potential regionalization of the conflict and the possible exacerbation of the latent tensions between Ethiopia and Sudan for the border dispute. Therefore, I would like to underline the fact that we must address the root causes of instability in the region if we want to create the preconditions for sustain peace and stability. Indeed, it appears clear that there will be no rooms for easing the tensions without a proper solution to the controversies over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the GERD, and to the increasing ethnical clashes within Ethiopia. On the GERD, we came to know that the talks conducted in the Democratic Republic of Congo under African Union guidance have reached a dead end, a fact that represents a constant over the last 10 years. Furthermore, in April, Tunisian President Kais Saied explicitly declared his support for the Egyptian claims, further increasing the possibility that two opposite poles standing on incompatible positions will emerge in Africa with Tunisia, Egypt and Sudan on one side, and Ethiopia, Eritrea and Somalia on the other side, fracturing the unity of the African Union. The position taken by Tunisia also paved the way for the issue to reach the UN Security Council. Mr. Havisto, do you think that the EU would be able to agree on a common position to be brought forward in UN fora? In your opinion, and according to your recent experience on the ground, what are the main issues on which an enhanced EU involvement in the negotiations and as honest broker between the two sides might be beneficial? Then, on Ethiopia's stability and the resolution of the conflict in Tigray, I have seen that in an interview with Arab News soon after your trip to Addis Ababa, you have mentioned the need for the EU to cooperate with Saudi Arabia deeply. Could you please elaborate further on the way you foresee to establish such a cooperation, and how could it be possible to cooperate with a country we have strongly criticized over the years for failing to respect human rights in a situation such as the one in Tigray? Lastly, I would like to hear your considerations on the humanitarian situation in Ethiopia and the alleged famine that is striking the Tigray region. According to UN reports, more than 350,000 people are currently living starvation, and yesterday the G7 leaders called for unconditioned access of aid workers and food supplies. Although this news is more recent than your trip to Addis Ababa, the worrying conditions in which people are living were reported also at the time of your trip. Therefore, I would like to know whether the Ethiopian government has made any promise to solve this humanitarian crisis, and if you discussed ways ahead that could entail a stronger role for the EU, maybe also through a reinforcement of UNF for Somalia in the case the WFO shipment will increase in number and frequency. The humanitarian crisis also affects the refugees who fled to Sudan in early phases of the war in Tigray. Can you tell us more about any potential negotiations between Addis Ababa and Khartoum that could allow refugees to return safely to Ethiopia? Thank you very much for all the details you will share with us and for all your kind answers. Thank you.
Thank you. I wonder if we have someone from the Greens connected. Ms. Alamatza, is she connected?
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Haavisto, for being here with us today. My colleague Reinhard Butikofer could not make it, but I took his part for this brief moment to thank you for your excellent work on this matter. And we are very grateful for all that you do for the peace in the region. What I would like to ask is that what is the main obstacle in your analysis to peace and also UN involvement in the region and in this process at this point? And secondly, what is the concrete thing that EU and we can do right now to ease the humanitarian crisis that we have in the area? Thank you once again so much, and thank you all for such great discussion on this topic, and I hope we will find a lot of answers today. Thank you.
Thank you. Asita Kanko, Afet is your. Not connected. Then we go to Janina Szoska, DEVE, EPP.
Ms. Ochowska, you have the floor.
Okay, we might come back to Janina then. We go to Norbert Neusser, DEVE, SND.
Vielen Dank für die Arbeit, die Sie.
Thank you for the work that you do in Ethiopia and Sudan.
Kleine Fortschritte im Bereich der humanitären Hilfe, aber immer noch kein Zugang für alle humanitären Organisationen.
The connection.
Interpreter apologizes, but this.
Fortschritt. Und Sie haben auch über die wichtige Rückkehr von Menschen nach West-Tigray, aus West-Tigray gesprochen. Ich denke, das ist sehr wichtig, denn wir stehen vor der nächsten humanitären Katastrophe, weil viele Felder durch den Konflikt nicht bestellt werden konnten. Ich will mich konzentrieren auf humanitäre Hilfe. Welche Überlegungen sind angestellt, damit diese humanitäre Krise besser gelöst werden kann, auch im Hinblick darauf, dass die Hungersnot sich noch erweitern kann? Und wie sehen Sie die Möglichkeiten, die extremen Spannungen zwischen den Ethnien innerhalb von Äthiopien gemeinsam mit der Zentralregierung zu befrieden? Weil man hat schon den Eindruck, dass
Entschuldigung, I'm sorry, Norbert. I think we don't have any translation, or is it just me?
The sound quality isn't adequate for interpretation purposes.
No, the connection is too poor for translation.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry, Norbert, you have the floor again. I didn't have any translation. I think I heard you well enough.
The connection was too bad for translating.
Seemed to be the case. We give the floor to Norbert Neusser again, of course, so we can do his closing.
The connection quality was not adequate for interpretation purposes.
Mr. Neusser, you have the floor. I would ask you to please remove your headphones.
Okay. So I continue in English. I just want to add what are the plans from from our Minister Haavisto to solve these humanitarian problems, because they are getting stronger, because in agriculture there was not really work to be done. And the second one is how to continue to work together with the government in Addis Ababa to calm down the ethnic conflict, because it's ongoing, and we have a similar situation like it was in former Yugoslavia, that the whole country is going down. Thank you.
Thank you, Norbert, and thank you for being so flexible. We move on then to the next one, and I give the floor to Mick Wallace from the left.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to Mr. Haavisto for his contribution. Do you agree at this stage that there's a recognition that war crimes have taken place and that Abiy Ahmed and Afwerki are clearly guilty of war crimes? And do you really think there's going to be an independent investigation? Will these two individuals be tried for war crimes? Surely, unless this happens, it makes a mockery of international law. Secondly, you talk about the so-called election process, and I agree with you, it is a so-called election process. Surely the EU isn't going to recognise these elections, given that it can be pretty selective about what elections it recognises across the world. But recognising these at the moment, with many of Abiy Ahmed's opponents in prison, makes it's just a joke. Thirdly, who is supplying Abiy Ahmed still with arms? He isn't making them himself. Somebody is giving them to him. Can we find that out? There is definitely countries continuing to give him arms to carry out war crimes. And lastly, he has support from world powers, whether we like it or not, but the US, Russia, China are all still prepared to do business with him because they all want a piece of the action in the Horn of Africa. So why are we allowing this to happen? Abiy Ahmed would not be in power if he did not have support from world powers. We're not looking for an intervention, but these people, Abiy Ahmed should not get support from outside countries, or Al-Farki for that matter. And giving them support is helping them and supporting their war crimes. And that's the truth of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I give the floor to Jan Christoph Ochen, Deve, Renew.
Thank you, co-chairs. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Haavisto as well for reporting back about his mission, and I'm wishing him good luck and success in this delicate affair. I want to ask him about the next steps he foresees or he would like to do in the different situations. First, concerning refugees, we already heard that we need a cooperation with Khartoum and the other capitals as well in order to have a safe return of refugees into the Tigray region. What does he think about the situation, and what does he foresee as next steps concerning this issue? Concerning the Nile waters, my colleague Javier Nat already highlighted the historical situation since 1959, and I want to reiterate the question of Maria Arena. So what can the European Union do in order to, from an outside perspective as a mediator, help that this situation does not escalate? But for me, most important is the situation for the people in Tigray. And we have a lot of reports about malnutrition and about a famine that is coming up. So I want to ask Mr. Haavisto if he's in contact with the humanitarian aid organizations, and what is his assessment on the situation concerning malnutrition, concerning the access for humanitarian organizations, and what can he do in order to open this corridor for humanitarian organizations in order to provide help for the people. And lastly, concerning the elections, I mean, we have an oppression of the opposition in Ethiopia, and so you cannot talk about real elections. And I agree that you said the retreat of the Eritrean troops from Tigray is a key priority, and is the base for creating new stability and new, let's say, communication or discussion with the Tigrayans. But how do you assess this situation? Will not those elections bring even more tensions into the country? Thank you.
Thank you. Beata Kempe, Deve, ECR. Not connected. And then I wonder if Janina Oszoska is connected. Yes. Okay, Janina, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm sorry, I am looking for... Yes, I'm sorry. Dziękuję panu Pekka Haavisto za ciekawą propozycję.
I would like to thank for the very interesting proposal, the presentation. The humanitarian situation is very interesting because it obviously affects stability in the region. Before the conflict in Ethiopia, there were 12.5 million people there who required humanitarian aid, 2 million in Tigray alone. Now, the situation is far worse. 2.5 million people have no access to water, to basic supplies, to food, and the humanitarian aid workers are there's little they can do. Since the crisis began, the EU wanted humanitarian corridors to be opened, to be operated by NGOs. I wanted to ask the Minister, do you know whether anything has changed in that regard? I'd like to know more about the dramatic shortage of water in the
Okay, Janina, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm sorry, I am looking for. Yes, I'm sorry. Dziękuję panu Pekka Haavisto za ciekawą propozycję.
I would like to thank for the very interesting proposal.